Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. Let's do a quick mic check. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Right. So let's try. Dr. Ming.
Hi. Hello. Can everyone hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Did you get some? Good ones. LinkedIn worthy. How are you, Doug?
Yeah, doing great. Doing great. How's everyone?
Good.
Yeah, doing well.
Good.
Dr. Nuki, are you on the line?
Yes, give me a second.
Okay.
How are you doing?
Hello, doctor.
Hey, hi.
Hey,
Yeah,
Dr. Nuki.
So my voice is clear or echoing?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear for me.
Okay. Otherwise, I will use my headset. Is it better?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Yeah. So
Okay.
everyone, just a quick run through. Later, I will kick off with a short introduction. And then after that, we will go into the opening remarks by Dr. Nuki. We just received today that MOIT, unfortunately, the Director General is meeting the Minister this afternoon, so could not be able to join us. Then after that, we will go into the panel discussion. We'll pass over the control to Joe to conduct the panel session. And then we will close off. So it's quite a short webinar. I think you are all very experienced. So well, trust all things will go smoothly.
Yeah. So just to confirm, Chen, Dr. Nuki will start for us?
Yes.
Okay.
I will do a short intro. Then I will introduce Dr. Nuki for the opening remarks.
Perfect.
And I'm guessing after the remarks, you will share your screen to run the slides that I'm doing the presentation on.
Yes. So, Joe, when you started the panel session, you may queue for me to pull out the slides. Then I put it up for Dr. Ming to do a short presentation.
Okay.
Any representative from Vietnam?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch.
Any representative from Vietnam representing the Directorate General of Electricity and RE? No one?
MOIT?
We're having...
Yeah, MIT. Mr. Hong is not there. Anyone replacing him?
No.
No, no one. Okay, then I have to create a room for my mom. Okay.
Dr. Nuki, I think we're having trouble hearing you now. I'm not sure if you need the mic closer or if there was a,
How about this one? What about this one? Is it better?
I think it is.
A
Doug?
bit better, yeah.
Oh, better. Okay, okay. That's, always working.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Yeah. So in a while, I will be about 3:59. I will pull up slides. So I will just show you. So once I show the slide, that means we are going live. So by this time, everyone, please refrain from speaking, and then I will do the introduction. Then we'll proceed from there. Good afternoon, everyone, friends and colleagues from across the world. Welcome to the ASEAN Energy Business Forum Industry Webinar themed Responsive and Cohesive Energy Pathways for ASEAN amidst COVID-19 recovery, co-presented by our knowledge partner, RiseTech Energy. My name is Yu Yuan, Project Manager of the ASEAN Energy Business Forum 2020. The global macro environment has seen a severe impact brought by COVID-19 pandemic and oil and gas price volatility this year. Governments, energy industry, international organizations have responded decisively to navigate the circumstances, review policies, initiate support schemes, adapt to and leverage technological innovations. And it has reaffirmed the importance of the ASEAN community to work together to ensure energy security, universal access, and acceleration to a low carbon future. And today's webinar will focus on 1, regional energy landscape after COVID-19, 2, energy transition strategy in ASEAN. For today, Ministry of Industry and Trade unfortunately cannot join us. Sincere apologies. To start off today's webinar, I would like to invite our co-organizer, ASEAN Center for Energy Executive Director, Dr. Nuki, to deliver his opening remarks. Dr. Nuki, please.
Thank you very much, Yuan. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues around the world. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and also I would like to thanks to Ministry of Industry and Trade, MOIT Vietnam, especially the Directorate General, Electricity and Renewable Energy. The ASEAN Center for Energy is pleased to welcome you to the ASEAN Business Energy Forum, or AEBF 2020 webinar launch. The AEBF is a high-level platform that facilitates interaction of regional and global players, as well as other important stakeholders in the ASEAN energy sectors, and provides an excellent opportunity to network directly with ASEAN policymakers. AEBF is also held annually, back-to-back with the ASEAN Ministers on Energy Meeting, or AMEN, wherein the key leaders of the ASEAN governments talk about various issues in the energy sector. This year, unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemics, we are not be able to meet face-to-face. However, ACE is still beyond pleased to welcome you all to the AEBF 2020, which will be held in parallel with AMEM next November through an online platform. Today, as a lead up to AEBF 2020 in November, this webinar aims to set the scene and initiate the discussion with the key industry speakers on responsive and cohesive energy pathways for ASEAN amidst COVID-19 recovery. Ladies and gentlemen, the severe impact of COVID-19 pandemic has been felt in almost all sectors, and of course, including the energy sectors. According to IEA, the global energy demand has plunged by 3.8% in the first quarter of 2020, and predicted to be declined up to 6%, and the largest ever in absolute terms. As also highlighted by the ASEAN Center for Energy in our COVID-19 Energy Insight, the most dominant consequences in this pandemic is the sharp declines in oil demand, resulting from the massive travel restriction and social physical distancing measures which occur in the most of the countries, including the ASEAN region, and of course, the declining of the industrial sectors as well as transportation sector. Within the ASEAN region, most of the AMS oil companies foresee revenue loss, since some of them have cut their national refinery activities as a response to the drop in transportation sectors. While in the power sector, the electricity demand also drops, particularly in the industry sectors. However, the working from home scheme has been introduced and increased the demand in the residential sector, which forced some of the government in the ASEAN region to provide incentive to ease the burden of vulnerable communities in their electricity bills. In terms of RE, considering China as the main global production source of RE technologies, the economic disruption in China may create supply chain bottlenecks for clean energy technologies in general. Several RE projects in the ASEAN region are at risk of major delays due to the changes in energy market and safety of the workers. Considering those impacts, the long-term strategic measures in the economic stimulus packages towards a sustainable recovery should not only intended for the national level, but also in regional level. The regional level assessment of COVID-19 implication to the energy sector is indeed important. As stated also by the ASEAN leaders on the special ASEAN Online Summit on COVID-19 held in April 2020, ASEAN reaffirmed the regional determination and commitment to contain the spread of the coronavirus and also to minimize impact on the societies and economies. One of the points of the summit is to encourage the development of a post-pandemic recovery plan by exploring the arrangement to preserve supply chain connectivity amongst ASEAN member states, including in energy sector. Recovering from the pandemic can be a pivotal moment to reset the priority of the regional energy cooperation to accelerate the energy transition and enhance the energy security and resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, through this webinar, we will further discuss some of the key highlights, which include the regional energy landscape after COVID-19, energy transition strategy in ASEAN. We hope that we can learn from today's exciting expert speakers in terms of defining the responsive and cohesive energy pathways and recovery for ASEAN. Lastly, I would like to thank to the Ministry of Industry and Trade, Vietnam, for the generous support, and also thank to our co-organizer, DMG event, for the excellent and professional management of the overall AEBF 2020, including this webinar. And thank also for the energy ministries of the ASEAN member states, ASEAN specialized energy bodies, private companies, institutions, and agencies that are involved in this event as well. I wish you all an exciting and fruitful session today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nuki, for your uplifting messages. Next up, we will have the panel discussion. And to lead this session, I would like to pass on the control to the distinguished moderator, partner of Tillerkey and Gibbons, Mr. Joseph Tonkiewicz. Joe, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chen, and thank you for your introduction, Dr. Nuki. I would also like to thank MOIT for hosting this session, and I regret that Hong Chan-Dong cannot attend with us today. Well, you've heard where Dr. Nuki and I are from. I wanted to take the first moment to introduce our other two speakers today. So why don't we begin with Doug Wharton. Doug, could you please introduce yourself and let us know some facts about you if you'd like to.
Sure. Thank you, Joe. And hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here and participate in this webinar. First and foremost, I hope everyone is safe and healthy amidst this COVID-19 health pandemic. Briefly, to introduce myself, my name is Douglas Wharton. I am Vice President for LNG origination for Cheniere, based in Singapore. For those of you that don't know, Cheniere is the largest producer of LNG from the United States. And in terms of operations, we are the second largest LNG liquefaction operator now globally. So I'm looking forward to the discussion here today, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. And last on our panel is Dr. Min. Dr. Min will be starting today, but could you introduce yourself, please, Doctor?
Thank you, Joe. And it is also my pleasure to be here today with all our distinguished panelists to discuss about the pathway of energy in ASEAN going forward. So I'm one of the analysts at Brightside Energy, working particularly on the renewable energy sector, and my focus is on APEC renewables. So very happy to be here today, and I would like to maybe beginning our panel discussion today with just a quick overview of what we see from Rystad Energy point of view on the renewable as well as extended energy sector in ASEAN. So pass back to you, Joe, and let me know when I can start with the presentation.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Dr. Min. Well, so I think we've put together our panel here. We have Dr. Nuki, Dr. Min, and Doug, and we'd like to start this presentation off today with a series of slides, as Dr. Min just told us. So Chen, if you could help post those slides up, Dr. Min could drive you through those slides then, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shane, and thank you, Joe. For anyone that doesn't know, Rystad Energy is an international knowledge house headquarters in Oslo, where we have 13 offices all around the world, looking closely at the energy market and energy sector at each of these regions. And one of those regions is very exciting, of course, is what we're here to talk about today, is the ASEAN region. So let's begin with the first slide here. I just want to really focus first onto the power sector of the ASEAN. We know that ASEAN is one of the highest growing region in terms of the economic demand and energy demand in the world, due to most of the countries in our region is still developing and still seeing a lot of economic growth. And one of those examples is Vietnam, which is our host today for this event. But when we see looking at the power demand for Vietnam here, the country will need actually double the energy that is currently installed now just to meet with the demand. And the same story here you can see in Indonesia as well. Some other countries in the region, such as Myanmar, will still need the energy not only for their economic growth, but also to help electrify 100% of their populations. So the demands here is still very strong. And what we're looking at here is the pre-COVID demand. And if the COVID situation improves, and we'll again see this demand continue to go forward in 2030 and so on. But what we know also in ASEAN is we are very much dependent on fossil fuels, whether that coming from coal or gas thermal power plants. But one of the good things following the trend of the world, the energy transition trend, have helped most of these countries putting in somewhat of a focus on renewable energy. If we look at the energy sector overall, renewable energy sector perhaps is one of the least impacted among the sectors during this pandemic. So moving on to this slide, what you can see here is after the feed-in tariff, a very successful feed-in tariff in Vietnam, the country has successfully built a very big pipeline of renewable new technology here. What we're talking about is solar and wind, as well as storage, like pump storage projects. So this energy demand will really help the country going forward to help build the renewable energy. But when we look at some of the other countries that I mentioned before and compare to the renewables pipeline here, we can see that some countries like Indonesia still very struggle to grow their renewable energy industry. They're still very much dependent on coal and still hasn't really put together a good policy to really drive this growth for renewable energy. And when we look at the growth in the next slide, what we can see is based on this pipeline, we believe that Vietnam will still be leading Southeast Asia and ASEAN region in terms of renewable installation. If this is our optimistic view, given that Vietnam appetite for energy is very strong, as well as appetite for new investment in terms of renewable energy, if the government have a good plan going forward, either through auction, feed-in tariff, or a good system for offshore wind, we'll see this growth coming in 2025. Another country that looking to kickstart its renewable energy industry again after the feed-in tariff is Philippines with its new renewable portfolio standard. And we're looking to see some growth in this region as well. But however, compared to these two countries, most other countries still very slow growing. and we hope to see some changes here going forward. And of course, onto the next slide, talking about now extending further toward the whole energy sector. Of course, we have to talk about oil and gas in this region, and perhaps it is one of the most impacted sector in the energy landscape in Southeast Asia. As you can see here, production has dropped a lot compared to our outlook pre-COVID, and onto the case where we see no significant projects will achieve FID this year. And of course, the investment will also going down onward to 2025. In order to help this industry grow, there need to be new investment coming here, and this will put a lot of pressure on the NOCs in the region to do their work here. Of course, when you look at the majors starting to pull out during this COVID period, still so very exciting landscape now with big challenges of the pandemic. I believe that our discussion today in the panel will be very exciting. So back to you, Joe. Hey, Joe, I think you are muted.
Sorry about that. I thought there was one more slide left in your packet. Could I refer back to the global map, or did we take that out?
We can have a look at the map of the region. Basically, we can show that to see how much number of assets in terms of renewables across the region. But it's not really necessary in terms of the general view. So no need to go on that slide.
Okay, great. Fair enough. Those were great slides and very informative. I know we had talked about adding that last slide to show the gap coming forward for gas and oil production, and Doug will probably talk to us about that shortly. But I wanted to go back to Dr. Nuki now, if that's okay. And Doctor, as the head of the ASEAN Center for Energy, has your point of view switched, or have there been additional pressures now to figure out if the transition towards renewables is still on track based on the last 6 months? I know in your opening comments you were fairly clear on the oil and gas demand, and then you raised the additional comment about safety of workers. But assuming there's not a second wave, do you have comments from your desk on the pace of the transition toward renewable?
Thank you, Joe. The ASEAN member state has agreed on achieving 23% in 2025 under the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation in 2016 up to 2025 plan, which is now on the end of the stage 1 and started on the stage 2 next year. Indeed, COVID-19 has impacted quite hard on the demand scenarios that we predicted. For example, when you plotted the ministerial target, its ministry target of the demand in 2025-2040, if you plot those policy regulation into the projection that we developed, in 2025, the TPS, for example, total primary energy supply will reduce 3.3% because of the COVID. And then in 2040, the total primary energy supply will also sloping down 2.3%. So there is a slightly change in terms of the projection. In regards with RE, there is no changes in terms of the plan. We're still aiming to 23% in 2025. However, it may have some challenges. According to our study, if we plot those current policy for all 10 member states in 2025 and 2040, and we also assuming that the government should do more to put an effort on RE. Since we do have, we call it in progressive scenarios, means that apart from the targeted scenarios where the government regulation and policy on RE is already set into place and projected into 2025 and 2040. So we ask them to do a more progressive implementation on RE. We call it the ASEAN progressive scenarios. The gaps in comparison with the previous or before COVID is increasing 1%. So it means that before COVID, we still have 4% gap to achieve 23% in 2025. But with COVID-19, the gap is even wider, up to 5.3%. That's what we've been doing, Joe, for the last couple of months. Yeah, and the ministry will not change any target in that sense. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that answer. Maybe I could let Dr. Min or Doug comment if they wanted to, but that's good news as far as I'm concerned, Dr. Nuki. I mean, it seems as if projections could have been worse, and I think an additional gap of 1.3% is something that obviously industries and business can try and step in to make up. So I'm enheartened by that news. Doug or Dr. Min, do you want to comment there, or would you like me to move on? Doug first.
No, it's okay. I think those were some good thoughts. I'm happy to continue, Joe, however you'd like to proceed.
Okay, well, good. Well, Doug, I mean, I liked your introduction, and I'm been following Cheniere for years, being from the United States and having worked and lived in Houston, Louisiana before, and I've watched the progress of your company, and it's been amazing. But I think it gives you a particular view on LNG and the role that it's playing in this COVID period and in the volatility of this year. What are your expectations now, and are they in alignment with Dr. Nuki's original comments? And could you share, maybe if you could, additional assumptions that you're allowed to speak about on either price or volumes that you're seeing? And if you feel a good connection, if you could link this back to the US market, because I know there's some particular nuances to the United States that might help us here, for those of us working and living in Asia, to understand what those volumes are all about.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. And I appreciate the kind introduction. You know, I think there's a few things we'd like to share from our perspective as an LNG producer and supplier. You know, I think at Cheniere, we're uniquely positioned because we have two operating LNG facilities in the US at Sabine Pass and Corpus Christi. And we have 20 long-term customers, existing customers from really the entire LNG industry, the full spectrum of different types of buyers and geographies represented by those buyers. Europe, throughout Asia, global portfolio players. So that allows us to really communicate with our customers and understand what they're seeing in the market. And without question, this has been an unprecedented year. I mean, the COVID situation has been a massive challenge for everyone from a health perspective and also from an economic perspective. But I think when you take a step back, you know, despite the pandemic, you know, we think the long-term LNG market fundamentals remain robust. So I don't think that's changed our long-term view. I think LNG is going to remain a high-growth industry, you know, based on growing economies worldwide over the long term, in particular in Asia, and with a increased focus on this desire for secure, affordable, and cleaner burning fuels. So I think that's really come to the forefront, and I think natural gas is going to play an important role in climate change discussions and the drive to reduce carbon emissions. I think that discussion has been accelerated with this COVID situation, and I think it's much needed. And that transition is going to take time. We don't know how long it's going to take, but I think the role of natural gas as a complement to renewables and power generation is going to be a powerful narrative going forward and important. So, we're we're optimistic on the long term, but the short term has been a challenge. And let me maybe just share some thoughts on what we're seeing today in the market and how that is influencing some of our thinking. So coming into this pandemic, LNG markets were already a bit weak. We had 2 mild winters in a row in North Asia. We had record LNG supply additions coming into the market. So you had that as a backdrop, and then you had COVID come in. So really you saw the biggest impact in Q2, quarter 2 of this year. I think, we were down on LNG demand by 20% in Q2. So, that was a big impact. And what we saw during that time is, the resiliency of the LNG market. There's a lot more commercial levers in place to rebalance portfolios, turn down volume if necessary. So there's a lot of things commercial tools that weren't available to the market previously. So we're starting to see the market rebalance. So LNG prices have recovered from the Q2 record lows, and now trade back to kind of the pre-COVID range of between $4 and $6. Really where they were through most of 2019 and early 2020. So I think what's important at these levels, just on an absolute price basis, gas and LNG is very competitive with coal. And we're seeing some coal to gas switching. We're seeing LNG and gas being very competitive in markets that have the ability to switch from coal to gas. And it's also influencing long-term planning. And we can come back to that, where I think particularly in ASEAN, you're starting to see some countries question their assumptions on additional coal build-outs long-term, and maybe moving more towards renewables plus gas as an alternative to building more coal. I think here we are in, the start of October. I think where we're going to get to at the end of the year is probably, LNG growth is probably going to be one of the few fuels that is not going to contract year over year. It's going to be close, but I think we're probably going to be pretty flat year over year. That's due in part, we have seen an increase in consumption in China and India. It's been offset a little bit by weaker consumption in Korea and Japan. But, so that's kind of the big picture backdrop. But if we could just, I did want to share some thoughts specifically on ASEAN, because I think there's some really interesting things going on in the region. It's a really important region for us, and something, Dr. Min presented in his opening slides, just the forecast power demand growth we're seeing out to 2030 is significant. That needs to be met by a combination of sources, whether it's renewables, gas, et cetera. So if you look at ASEAN through the end of August, the region actually imported just over 10.3 million tons of LNG, and that was a 1% growth year over year. So if you look at, Thailand, which I think has been one of the highlights for the region, at the end of August, LNG imports into Thailand were up 15% year over year, over 4 million tons. The country's been taking in a record number of spot cargoes. And what's interesting is you're seeing them turn down some Myanmar gas imports, which are down 11% year over year through July. And domestic production has been turned down 10% year over year through July. So they're using their commercial levers to turn down maybe some higher priced gas to bring in some spot LNG and take advantage of that. And I'll just quickly finish up around the region. Some of the things we're seeing: Myanmar has become an LNG importer, very exciting. In terms of meeting their power generation needs, LNG power projects. So they've become an LNG importer. Philippines is moving quickly ahead, as we see the Malampaya domestic gas field probably enter, this, kind of late stage, maybe terminal decline, and they need to find other sources of gas. And I think LNG to power will be a solution there. And lastly, probably the one challenging country we've seen this year is Indonesia. We're probably going to see negative growth, LNG growth for the year. It's down 28, almost 30% year over year through August. So there's a number of factors that have reduced demand there. So, but in the aggregate, my thoughts are, we're really optimistic for ASEAN as a whole. And, it's certainly a good time to be an LNG buyer. It's probably never been a better time to be an LNG buyer. So we're optimistic that natural gas will play an important role for the region going forward. So those are my thoughts, and looking forward to further discussion. So thank you.
Well, those are great comments, Doug, and I'm really glad you brought up the Thailand story. Living and working here in Thailand, I've been absolutely amazed at both the nimbleness of the Thai economy and the Thai energy ministry to manage that dynamic. You mentioned Myanmar bringing in LNG. I believe Bangladesh has as well. I wanted to ask you this as you were describing that, and I give you a lot of credit as well. This seems to be a very dynamic marketplace right now, where spot is very active, and I'm sensing that you've adapted quickly to that from your discussion here today. Is that the sentiment that I'm to take away from your comments, or is this business as usual, these types of sales? Maybe you could comment one way or the other.
Yeah, I think, look, there's no question it's been a challenging year to be an LNG producer, but at the end of the day, we are seeing a system that is more flexible, more resilient, and allows for more trade than we would have seen 10, 15 years ago in the LNG business. It's evolved from, this rigid point-to-point business to one where cargoes can be bought and sold and traded and optimized, which is ultimately good for the end user. And, a big part of that, quite frankly, was the introduction of US LNG, where, customers can buy a cargo from us and take it anywhere in the world. We don't have destination restrictions. We don't try to inhibit or restrict trade. We think it's good for everyone to be able, you purchase a cargo from Cheniere, you can take it wherever you want effectively. So that, I think, adds liquidity to the market, and it helps our customers, we think, deal with times like this, demand uncertainty, some of that, challenging times. And the point I would close with here is low prices, while difficult for producers and difficult for parts of the business, we are seeing a demand response. We are seeing countries say, look, I'm confident LNG is going to be affordable and accessible long-term, so I'm more comfortable building that into my long-term planning. I'm more comfortable pushing out coal. I'm more willing to do these types of things, to rely on LNG. It's no longer a premium or high-priced fuel option. We think it's affordable and accessible long-term.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I listened to your introduction, and you described your 20 core clients or core contracting partners or stakeholders that you have. And I wonder if next year, when you speak in your third consecutive AEBF, if you're going to have 30 or 40, or if the new normal is going to be a restricted contract, but that would probably be going too far ahead of ourselves. Why don't I move on then and go back to Dr. Min? We've talked, you gave us some great slides, and I'm still astonished by the power installation in Vietnam, which is just a great sign of progress there. And I'm so happy to see that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the projects you've been seeing that have been going forward or canceling. I know we're not going to really focus on the oil and gas scenario, but we're going to look towards renewable. These dual disruptions, what is your short-term and then long-term thinking about these projects holding on? I think Dr. Nuki gave us some good guidance on what he thinks the percentile disruption is. But do you have any specifics you wanted to highlight about the particular projects, cancellation, viability, continuation? Dr. Min?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Joe. When you look at the renewable energy industry in the region overall, is the response from the COVID-19 and also the impact from the COVID-19, we very much see a mixed case of positive as well as negative impact. So just to highlight a few positive cases here, even though Vietnam was hit by the pandemic as well as other countries, but also we start to see also as the feed-in tariff continue for solar, you start to see a very big project still coming online especially in the Ninh Thuan region. Given that they already install a lot of renewable energy in Ninh Thuan alone, and the plant here has received a lot of curtailment, which will be an economic hit for these developers. However, we can see that the government also respond to that, building transmission system to upgrade and be able to release this curtailed capacity. Probably one of the highlight projects during this COVID time is probably the Trung Nam project in Ninh Thuan. Probably when it finished will be the largest Southeast Asian solar farm at around 450 megawatts. And what special about this project also is Trung Nam is also building a 500 kilovolt line transmission, which is the first for the country when they allow one of the private players to build one of the higher capacity transmission line. And although with the COVID pandemic, the impact, they still managed to finish that line just a few days ago. So that is one of the success stories. Using Vietnam again to look at more of somewhat of a negative impact is looking over to the wind industry. Of course, when you look at the wind supply chain, a lot of the turbines that the wind farms in Vietnam is using are European manufacturers, Vestas, Siemens Gamesa, and so on. So there was a supply chain delay there during the COVID-19 impact. And this forces some of the developers to have to accept a bit higher price when they order these turbines. But what we still see is that with the feed-in tariff rush, just as similar to the solar situation that we saw last year, a lot of projects in the wind sector are currently being built. So a lot of foundation work and so on is still working on, and the more everyday, basically you see in news about projects going under construction or a new turbine supply deal has been made in Vietnam. However, what we're seeing in terms of a negative impact here in the wind industry is that some of these projects might not be able to meet the feed-in tariff deadline at the end of 2021. But this triggered the industry to come together and try to ask the ministry to extend this feed-in tariff deadline. And if they were successful, and there has been some positive talk that this deadline can be extended to 2023, and if that happens, then we'll see again a massive growth in Vietnam in terms of renewable industry, especially on the wind sector. Recently, also Vietnam is looking at the offshore wind, and when we talk about offshore wind roadmap here, this is the far offshore wind project, and this is where we see that a lot of foreign investor is coming into the countries. You start to see majors offshore wind developer from Europe starting to look more closely at Vietnam as well. So in terms of renewable energy in Vietnam, it's looking okay at the moment, even with the COVID-19 impact. Now move on a little bit to Philippines, then we see a little bit more negative impact here. Some of the project is still getting delayed due to the supply chain disruption from the solar side from China. And one of the things that you need to keep in mind here is when you look at the Chinese market, their own feed-in tariff is also ending very soon, and that triggered the construction rush in China, and therefore create a supply chain. They will not have enough panels to send out to other countries, not like in previous year that we see a lot of panel can be get for a cheaper price. And one of the probably one of the more controversial auction in terms of renewable energy that happened in ASEAN here is when we look at Myanmar. Actually, you can either see it as a positive case or a negative case. When we look at positive, it is quite amazing that they managed to get this auction success in terms of giving out and awarding projects during the COVID time. The auction actually started in May 2020, which is at the height of the peak of COVID-19 pandemic, the first wave. And they only actually, the initial release was only giving the developers and investors only 1 month to submit the bids. And the bids need to be submitted physically, while with all this travel restriction, it make it almost impossible to submit bid and come into the country. However, the ministry, they actually extend that auction into another month, so still 2 months, still quite short. But what we're seeing is a lot of Chinese players coming in because the government actually opened the border to some of the Chinese investors to come in during June. And therefore, we see a lot of bids coming from Chinese companies. And actually, when we look at the winning bids, they are also dominated by Chinese companies. And basically, only one project is coming from AEBF, which is a non-Chinese players. And actually, the Chinese influence throughout this pandemic, we will start to see a lot more when we see State Grid taking control of a certain percentage of the transmission grid in Laos, as well as not only winning the bids in the LNG thermal plants in Myanmar, they start to also winning the bids on renewable energy in Myanmar as well. We start to see quite good forecast for the renewable energy sector here in Southeast Asia, even with the COVID pandemic. However, this is still, only 2 or 3 countries that we are talking about, and given out 3 out of 10 countries in ASEAN, that's still not quite there to really see a good transition from other countries as well. And when you see that the new power development plan being released with more focus moving on to gas, especially in Vietnam, then we might start to see gas becoming a lot more important compared to coal, and to be able to transition into renewable energy as well.
Well, those are fantastic comments, Dr. Min. I mean, I'll say this too, I'm slightly conflicted. I spent much of my COVID working from home looking at the free Rystad 1-hour tutorials on a whole range of topics. And if those of you listening online haven't subscribed to those, they're fantastic, in particular for the Asian market. But you really highlighted the supply chain early in the Rystad publications, and I'm glad you brought it up here today. It's such an elemental part of the legal work that I'm doing for the renewable space, less so for the oil and gas traditionals. And I think it needs to be understood and addressed. And I think any due diligence for new projects in renewables really have to have line of sight on where your material and equipment are coming from. It's just undeniable to me. And I, like you, was astonished because I was helping advise some clients in the Myanmar market, but I was delighted that they held to their schedule and only delayed for a short period of time. So I give a round of applause to Myanmar for pulling off the fee proposal and the bid tender for the solar projects there. So thanks for pointing those examples out. I really think it shows the dichotomy, supply chain problems for renewable, but versatility and quickness in renewable that maybe is going to bring back that marketplace quickly or quicker than one could see perhaps if you were involved in the final investment decision on a larger LNG facility. And so I think we're starting to see the nimbleness of the renewables industry, and hopefully it rewards them. We have about 15 minutes left, so maybe we'll have one more question for Dr. Nuki and then the final one for Doug and do some questions. But Dr. Nuki, I noticed in some of your original comments, you talked about declines in oil and gas demand. But we also, in our prep sessions here, we talked a little bit about the coal dynamic, and I think Doug gave us a little look inside the boxes. Has there been an LNG coal swap in the short term in Asia? Does it extend to the long term? And is that even a worldwide trend where folks are moving away from coal? I think the US and Europe, Western Europe, have a new narrative on coal. But I'm curious for you at the ASEAN Center for Energy, if you're starting to contemplate the coal position, and if there's any momentum behind new outlook for coal, or if you're going to hold steady, and what do you think the reliability of that analysis is going to be?
I think if you're looking at the and the projection of there are 2 possibilities. First, it's going to go on a transition where we need to have a baseload which is the inertia is quite good enough to uses of the VRE, for example. Therefore, some other alternative apart from coal is necessary. As Doc mentioned, gas is quite good alternative to replace coal in that sense. However, the COVID-19 perhaps changed the target of penetrating the RE at the moment, since most of the member states are concentrating on their economics rather than investing on the energy sector, especially on the RE. As mentioned by Dr. Min, that plenty of project is being halted and a lot of investment on RE still on the wait and see process. This year is quite interesting because the impact on the energy sector is coming from two sides, which is not only the demand side coming from COVID-19, but also the supply sides coming of the mainly on the price war, declining of the cost, declining of the price of those fossil fuels, and this even harder for RE currently this year to penetrate. However, if you're looking at the lower term, if you're looking at the potential of RE in the longer term perspective, that will be a different story. And our study on the ASEAN interconnection master plan studies that putting the cost optimization approach, we assume or we predicted that when we penetrate the VRE up to 40%, which is very possible, then the cost will be very competitive for RE to be in that percentage. But the studies need a lot of efforts, especially the political effort coming from the member states, and also technical changes that are required on the transmission itself, since the current member states transmission is not yet connected into all of the 10 member states, and some of the technologies still cannot bear the penetration of the VRE. So we need to upgrade the transmission, and therefore we need the extra investment for increasing the VRE into the grid.
Those are great comments, Dr. Nuki. I mean, I sit and wonder, are the people involved in accelerating that, is this going to be a business-driven opportunity or a government-driven opportunity through the ASEAN members, or is it going to be a collaboration, or how do you see this playing out short-term, long-term?
Currently, we are starting from the government perspective because it needs political will, as I mentioned before. So when they agree on being connected, and quite a good news that Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, integration or interconnection projects already being started, and I think this year there will be signing an MOU on that particular project. So that's a very good start. It will be expanded into Singapore, and hopefully Indonesia will follow suit. So with this political will, that will be opening up the possibilities for private sectors or business sectors to jump in and to enrich and enlarge the potential of RE, for example, and also, of course, power generation type in the region.
Well, that's a great answer. I mean, I'm looking forward to those opportunities. I know in the oil and gas sector, the Malaysia-Thailand Joint Development Authority is a great model for that type of cross-border arrangement. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of those discussions. So thank you for that answer. How about if I jump back to you, Doug, for our last question, and then I have some questions that have come in from the panel that I can do, but if anyone else in the audience would like to ask questions, you can send them in and I can see them right up on the screen here. Doug, maybe it's a report card time. We'll go back to school here a little bit. And how would you grade your response as an executive at the company, or the company's response to COVID and the oil and gas disruption? I know you talked about last December and November, and I've heard your views on that before, that there was already a dynamic in play for you, but how would you grade that response? And then, how are you viewing the United States or the overseas markets' responses to what's going on? And is there going to be an imbalance as Asia moves forward with demand? Is there going to be a corresponding letdown in production elsewhere in your mind, if you can say?
Sure. No, thank you, Joe. Good question. I think there's two parts to how we handled the COVID response, and I think the first was, I'd like to recognize, on the operations side, because we do operate 2 LNG facilities. There is a large workforce that manages the day-to-day operations of those plants. So certainly, the health and safety of those workers was paramount as the COVID pandemic was taking hold earlier this year. So we took a lot of steps to ensure the safety of the workforce, staggered shift schedules. We had some housing on site built very quickly so we could isolate key personnel and make sure that they stayed safe and can continue to operate the plants. So there were a number of steps we took proactively to ensure that there was no disruption to our operations. And now, I'm happy we can say today that, the LNG supply chain for us operated uninterrupted throughout the pandemic period. All of the Cheniere customers received all of their nominated cargoes. So from that perspective, really everybody did a world-class job, and everybody stayed safe and healthy, which was very important. On the commercial side, there's no question it was a difficult year. We've all seen the volatility in commodity prices and our business model, because we're buying natural gas from the U.S. market. Our model is we don't put all of our eggs in one basket. And what I mean by that is we buy from multiple suppliers, supply different parts of the country in the U.S. We have multiple pipeline agreements. So we're not reliant on a single supplier or a single source. We buy gas from the entire U.S. market. So even though there was a demand response, particularly on the oil side, we're in the Permian Basin, for example, companies were pulling rigs, they were reducing production, they were cutting CapEx. But the U.S. natural gas market is so deep and so liquid that we were able to manage that supply seamlessly, and there was no impact on our customers. So I think that was the most important point at the end of the day. There's no question that U.S. production is down, both on the oil and gas side. They're very sensitive to changes in the market, and there was the price response, and that's without question. But I think the benefits of being a U.S. supplier is that there's so much natural gas in the U.S. And even though there's some challenges on the oil side, we're confident on the natural gas side, there's so much gas, really more gas than the U.S. can use. We need to have continued exports, and that hasn't changed. So we don't see anything that's changed that fundamental reality that the U.S. is going to remain the world's leading natural gas producer, and that translates to a great place to have LNG export terminals located. So I think when you add all that up, I think it's not to pat ourselves on the back, but I think we've done a good job responding to what's been a really challenging year for Cheniere and for the industry.
Well, good. Thanks for that answer, Doug. I mean, to me, hearing that all of your nominated cargoes were received really is a good sign of nimbleness on your part. I just accused the oil and gas industry of not being nimble, but well done in that regard. And it's interesting to hear that, you know, 10 years ago, I guess we wouldn't have thought of this, but spot US cargoes, Asia, frequent, you know, these are new words for us. So I think we adapt to this as an industry and we manage it, but it'll be interesting to see how the next 6 months play out as we move into the winter season. Maybe I have one question here that's come in. Let me see, I think it sounds like a Dr. Min question. With your work at Rystad, are you seeing themes that are common to all renewables, or are we seeing a fragmentation? Unlike traditional oil and gas, are we seeing a fragmentation between wind, solar, hydroelectric, biomass, traditional renewables? So do you understand that question? Is your analytical approach to the market for renewables fragmented, or is it a unified approach that you take, or are you finding more complexity in this analysis, Dr. Min?
I think to be able to understand a market, you know, in all of its essential, we need to be able to look at both solar, wind, storage, as well as other form of energy as a whole. For example, if you're forecasting what is the installation in solar without taking into account also the wind bill, the transmission grid might not be able to help you with your prediction in that case. So for us at Rystad Energy, we're really taking as a whole approach when we look at renewable energy industry. And also we're starting to look more into the storage side of things, as well as you know, the energy transition is moving on across the world. And what we're seeing is, of course, a lot of this transition will be dependent on what is the storage form of energy that you can use to help with the intermittency of renewable energy. And when we're looking at the global view of renewable energy in total, and we're going back to the COVID story, then again, what we're seeing is a lot of this government response here has somewhat of a renewable energy focus. And you really see this in Europe when you're seeing a lot of plans going ahead for hydrogen, for green hydrogen to help boost the economy as well. So we're taking a view in all of these energy transition and renewable energy to be able to help with us with our forecast, looking at the energy sector as a whole. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. That made very good sense to me. We do have some additional questions that have come in, but it's 3:58. I would like to honor our time commitment. And so maybe I'll try and conclude here. I would like to once again thank Dr. Nuki for his co-hosting of this event along with MOIT. And we are sorry we weren't able to have the Director General here. Doug, it was a pleasure hearing you speak today, and I'm glad to see the progress Cheniere is making. Dr. Min, it was good hearing your analysis, and thanks again to Rystad for providing such valuable information over the last months. I heard some themes today, and Dr. Min raised supply chain and supply chain complexity. I think it's something we as an industry and ASEAN as a body need to understand is dynamic and changing. And from the ground, it's very hard to predict supply chain availability for products like solar and for some of the support services in oil and gas. And so I think this is something that perhaps is a first look, and we'll need to focus on that. I think I'll look back to Dr. Nuki's original comments. Worker safety in this industry in both renewables and traditional oil and gas is the #1 priority. And so managing the complexity here while managing the safety of employees has always been an issue, but this is particularly acute when it comes to dealing with offshore facilities or remote facilities like we see in much of the ASEAN area. And so thanks to Dr. Nuki and Doug for comments in that regard. And so absent other comments or closing statements from you, Doug, Dr. Nuki, or Dr. Min, on behalf of myself, Joe Tomkowitz, here in Thailand from the law firm of Telekian Gibbons, I'd like to thank you for letting us speak today. It's been an honor and a privilege to do so. And we really have a lot of faith in the ASEAN AEBF to put forward the appropriate issues and to provide solutions and direction. And I consider this to be one of the most important events in Asia for energy security And I really appreciate the work that's being done here. So thank you to all of the attendees and all of the folks who actually have to do the work here. The speaking is the easy part. The commitment to action is obviously the hard part. So thank you very much. And gentlemen, unless you have anything else to say, I will pass this back to Chen, and thank you.
Right. Thank you, Joe, Dr. Nuki, Dr. Min, and Doug for an engaging discussion. Friends and colleagues, thank you for watching. And today's session is just a prelude to the exciting discussions at the ASEAN Energy Business Forum from 3rd to 5th November, the region's most important and influential forum led by 10 ASEAN energy ministers, NOCs, power, LNG companies, wind, solar storage, hydrogen, and financing sector leaders. Find out more at www.aebf.asia. We welcome you to join us and look forward to seeing you this November. Thank you.